He's the Missoula Field Office Outdoor Recreation Planner for the Bureau of Land Management. He was heavily involved with the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial and has a presentation on that, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you. Yeah, in my previous assignment, had this amazing opportunity to take a 4-year departure from my job and lead the Bureau of Land Management's participation in the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial. And that's the subject that I want to speak to, is that experience and the exhibit that we put together to take on the road. We started out in Monticello, Virginia in January 2003, worked our way all the way out to the Oregon coast in the fall of 2005, and then ended up back in St. Louis in 2006. And this is the exhibit that we took on the road. Just to set the stage a little bit, by the very nature of the expanse of the trail and the amount of stops, we stopped at over 100 communities and set up. We knew that we needed to have something that was highly mobile. We also made a decision early on that in terms of what our target audience was. We realized it was a national commemoration. We don't say celebration with the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial because there's some great changes that came to Native communities and as a result of the expedition. So this was a commemoration of that event, certainly not a celebration. And we made a decision early on that our target audience was going to be a very regional thing. Although it was a national event, the events themselves were all in small communities, and it was very much a regional, local audience. And to focus our efforts down even more, we decided what we really wanted to target was youth. We figured that, first of all, we had already realized that what is now called nature deficit disorder was a concern to us, and we wanted to try to make that connection with youth. But we also figured that if we could engage the youth, the parents would come. They'll drag them along. So right off the bat, we decided to target it towards somewhere in that 4th grade to 8th grade range. So it was highly mobile, designed for kids and families. And then the other part of it, because it was targeting youth, it was hands-on. There was nothing in the exhibit a child could get in trouble for touching. In fact, we encouraged them to touch. We had a grizzly bear hide there, and they were more than welcome to touch the teeth and the claws and pet the fur and all the skulls and the plant exhibits, and all this stuff was all hands-on. There were activities that children could do that they could take away the product from, and it all was embedded with the messaging of land stewardship and how do we link the Lewis and Clark expedition to today. So for one example, and oh, by the way, this exhibit is set up right over here in the corner. There's a life after the bicentennial for this exhibit, and I'll talk more about that later. But so, if for instance, for our Native American station, we talked about how crucial the tribes were to the success of the expedition, and hands-on activity was to use actual artifacts, actual monomatate stone grinders, and we got the corn from the Mandan Indians, so we're using Mandan dried flour corn, the kind of corn that they genetically created for flour, and use the actual artifacts. So kids could go and grind their own corn. The little paper you see in the corner is a recipe for cornmeal dumplings, so they can take their corn home and actually have mom or dad help them make cornmeal dumplings if they wanted to. So there was a lot of follow through on this kind of stuff. Another example was the General Land Office patent for homesteads. Each one of the members of the expedition got a award of land for their participation in the expedition. We had William Warner's patent that a child could actually press the actual seal. That's the actual seal of the old General Land Office there. And they could press that in and take that home with them. Or, because we wanted to make it personally relevant to them, they could select a patent for the site they were actually standing on. So we had both an expedition patent and a land patent for the actual ground that they were standing on, their hometown. We wanted to talk a lot about the wildlife that you find on public lands, and we wanted to introduce folks that weren't familiar with Western wildlife to those kind of critters. So we had actual grizzly bear skulls, black bear skulls, footprint castings, and again, a child could not get in trouble for picking that up. We welcomed it, we encouraged them, handle it, touch it, understand it, bring it home, make it personal. You've heard a little bit about our National Landscape Conservation System in the Bureau now, so we wanted to highlight those special places on public lands. One of those is Fichtler in eastern Montana, where you have Captain Clark carving his name and a date into the side of the stone on July 25th of 1805, or 1806, excuse me, on their way home. So we did an exact replica of that. We took a picture of the signature and then transcribed it onto a piece of sandstone, carved that into the sandstone, and the kids can do a crayon rubbing of that actual signature, an exact replica, and take it home with them. It's always this notion of they can learn by experiential activities, and then they have something that they can take home with them to remind them of that. That's a little dark. We're very concerned about noxious weeds here in Montana. I suspect that's universal across most of the country anymore. So one of the things we did was a flip book that showed pictures of native plants and pictures of noxious weeds. And then we had stamps that they could make bookmarks out of. And these were all native plant stamps, bitterroot, balsam root, those kinds of plants. And they could do a little ink pad stamp on a piece of cardstock and have their own bookmark as something that they could take away. We were blown away by the reception that we got. Right off the bat, we were looking at, we can accommodate about 20 to 30 kids in that exhibit. Stay times were typically 20 minutes or more. So at these bigger events, like this was taken in Bismarck, North Dakota, we had 10,000 kids that went through in 10 days. Long hours and wonderful experience. But we actually had them waiting an hour to get into the exhibit. Once the teachers got a hold of what this experience was like in this exhibit, every class had to go through. They postponed their buses and wait until they had a chance to go through before they'd go home. And it gave our staff a real chance to actually kind of bond with the kids, because it was a very intimate experience, kind of one-on-one. We had it heavily staffed, there'd be 3 or 4 staff members in this tent with this exhibit. And then the other thing we did was to give them a little Lewis and Clark bandana as a giveaway. So they had one more little thing to remind them of that experience, one more little tactile thing that they could learn from and then have as kind of a reward. And this is, of course, what was driving us, is our concern about the disconnect between our public lands and our publics, and the need for kids to re-engage in that. So what we were doing was trying to promote that appreciation for public lands and perhaps generate a new crop of land managers. A lot of folks like me are getting pretty long in the tooth, a little white on top and a little gray in the beard, but it's not long before a whole generation of us land managers will rotate out, and we're looking for that next generation. One of the things we did there, you might have noticed that there was a fair amount of text. That was one of our mistakes. That was just too much text. So what we ended up doing was we had a voluntary quiz that the kids could fill out, and each panel had some little tidbit of information, and if they looked through the panel, they could find the answer to a particular question. That's how we overcame that error of having too much words on those panels. And then once a day, we drew from those quizzes and gave away a brass medallion commemorating the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial. So one lucky kid every day won one of those brass medallions, and that was the reward for doing the quiz. And that's really what it was all about, was those kinds of reactions from our target audience. What we're doing now in the future is, of course, the bicentennial is long over, and we had a heck of an investment in that exhibit, and we realized that really the messaging and the target audience hadn't gone away, even though the bicentennial had. So what the BLM did was we reached out to the Lewis and Clark Trail Heritage Foundation, our good partners through the bicentennial, and said, we want to take this back out on the road. We want to continue that experience, and we want to continue and promote that outreach into schools.